Okay, that brings us to the end then of the United States appeal against the decision of the Westminster Magistrates Court earlier this year not to extradite Julian Assange. We've got a number of people here who are going to give their responses to the day's events and to the situation we now find ourselves in. I'm very, very pleased to welcome, first of all, Claire Daly and Mick Wallace, who are two Irish MEPs who've done absolutely marvellous work on the Assange campaign. Great pleasure to have you here.
Thanks very much, and I think, like all of you, for us to be here is both a crime and an honour. It's a crime that we have to be here in support of the person who, more than anyone else, has exposed US war crimes in Afghanistan and Iraq. The criminals walk free and Julian Assange is persecuted. That is a crime. It's a crime that he is being tried under an extradition treaty negotiated by war criminal Tony Blair for war criminal George Bush, so that the political arguments cannot be heard, because this is a political prosecution, and therefore we are honoured to be here on the right side of history in defence of free speech, in defence of Julian Assange. Our efforts after today will only be redoubled, because this will be won politically rather than legally. I salute you all for your efforts and urge you to continue.
Much of the debate for the last 2 days was pretty boring. A lot of it was based around the idea that, oh, the US now are going to give assurances that Assange will be treated well if he goes to America. They have one of the worst prison systems on the planet. 25% of the world's prisoners are in the US, and it's privatized, and it's a horror scene. The idea that we would accept any assurance from a state that has been lawless for the best part of 100 years. The US has been a colonial project since the day of its founding, starting with the genocide of the Native Indians of North America. And it hasn't stopped since. But there's so much at stake in this, and that's why it's so important that you're here. Only we need an awful lot more. There's an awful lot at stake. I don't say democracy at stake, because that's been pretty well lost, and I haven't seen a whole lot of it around for a while. But journalism is in serious danger. It's already been undermined. Mainstream media have lost the plot and have sold out. It's all the more reason why journalism is more and more important. Real journalism where people tell the truth. But international law is equally under threat. The Americans break it every day. They're a lawless state. All the more reason why Assange shouldn't be sent there. And if the UK send Assange to America, it just goes to show they're a lawless state themselves. But it's so important, as Claire said, this is a political debate, but it'll only be won by the people. Politicians don't serve you. The people need to pressure the politicians into doing what you want them to do. They are not.
Think they're our masters.
It's so important that more and more people engage with what's really happening here. Because what Assange and WikiLeaks did in 2010 was the biggest game changer in my lifetime. It exposed once and for all the lies that the wars were based on, and the lies that the wars are. All the more reason we have to keep up the pressure, and we need to change how things are done. We need to say no to US imperialism, UK imperialism, European colonialism. The hell with the Latin.
Thanks very much, and now I'd like to welcome Rebecca Vincent from Reporters Without Frontiers, who's been observing the whole of the trial and the whole of this appeal.
Thank you. As John said, Reporters Without Borders has monitored this 2-day appellate hearing, as we've monitored the entire extradition proceedings to date. We are the only NGO that has managed to do this due to severe restrictions on observation imposed by the various courts involved. This has made it extraordinarily difficult for us to do our jobs. Nonetheless, we have fought for our right to be here, to bear witness to these proceedings and document our observations, because this case matters so immensely. What is happening to Julian Assange will have historical implications for journalism and press freedom internationally. If the United States is successful in extraditing Julian Assange, he will be the first publisher prosecuted under the Espionage Act, which lacks a public interest defense. That means anyone facing a similar case in the future would also be unable to defend themselves. What is on trial here is journalism. If Julian Assange is imprisoned for publishing information in the public interest, an alarming precedent will be set, and any publisher, any journalist, any source, anywhere in the world could find themselves in the same position. While this case is being brought by the United States, which should drop these charges immediately, the UK has certainly played its own indefensible part. It is worth recalling that this did not have to be a matter for the UK courts. In 2019, the government could have taken a decision in favor of press freedom and journalism and denied the US extradition request. Instead, the UK government bowed to political pressure and green-lighted the extradition request, which is why we're all standing here today. It is the UK which sentenced Julian Assange to a staggering 50 weeks in prison for breaking bail, and it is the UK that has kept him detained in high-security Belmarsh prison alongside violent criminals ever since, convicted of no crime, only pursued by the US for his contributions to journalism. If anything happens to Julian Assange in the UK or the US, the UK also bears responsibility. We won't know the outcome of these proceedings for some weeks. It is our hope that justice will prevail and that this will be the end of the decade-long persecution of Julian Assange. Nothing can undo the damage that has already taken place, but it is imperative that this travesty is brought to an end and that reforms are implemented to ensure that this can never happen again, anywhere, starting with the introduction of a public interest defense to the US Espionage Act, the UK Official Secrets Act, and all similar legislation around the world. What is at stake here is not only the rights of one man, but the ability of journalists everywhere to do their jobs, to hold power to account and ensure our ability as the public to access information that we have the right to know. This is not just about Julian Assange, it is about every single one of us. Regardless of what happens next, Reporters Without Borders will be here, fighting for Julian Assange's release and campaigning in cases around the world where journalism is under threat. Thank you all for your support and solidarity along the way.
Hey!
We hope to be back with some long-awaited good news in the coming weeks. But in the meantime, we call yet again for these charges to be dropped, this case to be closed, and Julian Assange to be immediately released. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thanks to your organisation for its support. Now I'd like to call Kristen Huffington, the Editor-in-Chief of WikiLeaks, to give his reflections on this trial.
Thank you. This afternoon, the lawyers for Julian Assange were tearing apart the so-called assurances, the revocable assurances that the US is now claiming that they can put forward. The assurances that Julian will be treated fairly, treated well in the prisons in the United States. He will get medical help and all that. Now, I just want to remind people that in the magistrate court, they had all the opportunity to actually voice such assurances. They did not. On the contrary, they went on the defense. They said for the prison system in the United States. They said that so-called special administrative measures, which basically equals solitary confinement, which basically equals torture, and for Julian in his condition, death. That the SAMs were not that bad at all. They also defended AGX Florence, Colorado, the most notorious prison in the United States, where Julian might end up in. They were defending that prison in a manner that was extraordinary. They were saying that Julian or prisoners in AGX Florence, they could have recreational activities. They could play bridge. What are they saying? That Julian would in AGX Florence be sitting down with El Chapo, with Timothy McVeigh, the Unabomber, and other homegrown terrorists and play bridge. And they also said, and quote unquote, which the Julian's lawyers actually pointed out this afternoon, that they could have individual, well, recreational activity in their own cells. What does that mean? They are throwing people in cells and keeping them in there for 22 to 23 hours a day, only an hour outside the cell, in another cell with nothing in it. That's what waits Julian on the other side, on the Devil's Island, if he is extradited. That cannot happen. The judges here have only two choices. Basically uphold the decision not to extradite Julian Assange, or de facto give out a death sentence. That cannot happen. And we have to rely on all of you to make sure that in the weeks ahead, while these two judges are deliberating, that you make your voice heard, that you put pressure on your media, on your politician, everywhere, because this cannot happen.
And now finally, to sum up our view of what's been happening in the court over these last couple of days and what the future holds, I'd like to ask Stella Morris, Julian Assange's partner, to close this meeting.
Hi everyone, can you hear me? If you can't hear me, put up your hand and I'll try to speak up. The US, if the US wants to treat Julian fairly and well, they should drop this case.
Yes.
They should release Julian from prison because he is suffering right now. In court today, Mark Summers, QC, Julian's defense, said that there is nothing normal about this case. There is nothing normal about this case. And it's not just the defense that says that. The CPS told Sweden in 2010, please do not think that we are treating this as a normal extradition case. This is a political persecution that has used the law, extradition law, as a tool to further its political agenda. To take revenge on a journalist for what? For the publications that he is now indicted over. Publications that revealed war crimes, targeted assassinations, rendition, torture, but also the US subversion of the judiciary in Germany, in Spain, in Italy, when those judges, those investigators, had the gall to investigate those same crimes, to investigate CIA rendition and torture of their citizens. This US extradition case has been falling apart since the moment it started. Because it was born rotten, it was born at a time when the CIA was plotting to assassinate Julian. And it is also proving to be devastating for the US in the courts. Not only because the US prison system and its inhumane conditions is exposed before these courts in its full barbarity, but also because the crimes that have been undertaken by the US government against Julian are also exposed before these courts. Today, we were able to air in court Mike Pompeo's plans, his sketches and options to assassinate Julian in London. To assassinate a journalist in this city for doing his job because he exposed their crimes. This country cannot tolerate, should not tolerate, the targeted assassination of journalists for doing their jobs. This should be obvious. We shouldn't be here. I hope the courts reach the right conclusion. But I also call on the US government to not just say they defend media freedom, to not just say journalists shouldn't be killed or imprisoned, but actually they should walk the walk, not just talk the talk. They should drop this case. They should free Julian. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming, and thank you to the journalists who've reported this. I'd just like to leave you with a couple of thoughts about how this has got to go forward now. I want to recall just a single moment in this afternoon's hearing when Mark Summers QC for Julian first raised the question of the Yahoo story, that is of the CIA plot to either kidnap or assassinate Julian Assange. The judge leant forward and halted him for a moment and said, yes, I'm sure we know that the CIA is interested in Mr. Assange. And Mark Summers had to stop him and say, it's not about them being interested, it's about them plotting to kidnap and kill him. Now that judge must be one of the very few people in this city that doesn't know the facts of that plot or can't see the significance of them for this case. So if he can't see it now, it's up to every journalist, every citizen, every campaigner to make sure that as they think about their decision in this case, they do know about it, do understand it, do understand that this is a political trial, that in a political trial you can't assume that the people bringing the prosecution are acting in good faith when they give you assurances of good treatment for the very person whom they're seeking revenge on for exposing their war crimes. That's not a sensible or serious attitude, and only public campaigning can change that now. Every court case is won 50% in court and 50% in the court of public opinion. We are still on our feet as the defenders of Julian Assange in the court of public opinion. So redouble your campaigning, redouble your lobbying. Go to the DEA website, use the tools there to make as much noise, as much fuss, as much publicity as you possibly can. This isn't over until Julian Assange is walking down the street a free man.